August 19, 1692 was one of the apexes of the famous Salem witch trials, the best-known witch hunting case that took place that year in a small Massachusetts town, USA, in a Puritan British colony where the church was in charge of all things. About 200 people were arrested or accused of witchcraft, and 20 were sentenced to death. 5 of them were put to death on this day. One case concerning the 3 girls with symptoms of a bizarre disease progressed into the hysteria of a whole community. In today's video, we will talk about this case of demonic possession, witches, and a horrifying trial. Throughout the freezing January 1692, unsettling incidents broke out in the Salem parish house. Reverend Samuel Parris's 9-year-old niece and 9-year-old daughter, who, up to that point, had been well-behaved girls, started shivering and shaking, screaming, groaning, and barking like a dog. A local doctor was called and provided a stark diagnosis that the girls were not suffering from any typical medical problem, but rather an evil hand in action. The doctor was referring to a devil's agent. This assessment would result in one of the darkest and most bizarre episodes in early American history. Desperate to find out who this evil hand was, Mary Sibley, a local woman, urged the Presbytery girls to bake a witch's cake. Drenched in urine and fed to a dog, this folksy procedure was intended to reveal the identity of the malevolent force behind the girls' tribulations. Parris was livid when he learned of this, grew outraged with his congregation, and sought to take action. A few days after baking the witch cake, the girls were pressured, and they identified 3 witches masquerading as marginalized members of their community: Tituba, a slave; Sarah Good, a beggar; and Sarah Osborne, a poor elderly woman. Reports of the black magic outbreak spread throughout the small New England settlement, and almost seemingly supernatural incidents. More girls experienced similar seizures and convulsions, while others found hairy beasts in their fires or experienced being pinched and stung by invisible hands. The settlers' steadfast belief that they were being afflicted by agents of Satan was quickly followed by a desire to eradicate those responsible and hold them accountable. In May 1692, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony appointed a special court at Salem. The courtroom assembled and ecstatically listened to testimonies that told of flying witches, supernatural beasts, and satanic Sabbaths. Suspected witches avowed eyebrow-raising sins and mentioned neighbors and relatives who were also devil's allies. All hell broke loose in the courtroom as the accusers squealed, wailed, and declared themselves tormented or smothered by the evil spirits of those standing trial. All 3 women accused by the girls gave their side of the story. Tituba confessed that she had been visited by the devil and that she had become his servant, presumably because she believed that this would free her from the gallows. She also accused a few other women of conspiring against the Puritans. She and the others, who had pleaded not guilty, were arrested. The contagion spread to the surrounding Salem communities as the trials unfolded. As the accusations multiplied by the hundreds, and even the governor's wife got implicated, those in charge started to have questions. Were there really that many witches in New England? When the Salem court was finally disbanded and the trials failed, the show dragged on for more than a year. 19 witches were hanged, with at least 5 others dying in jail, and one man being stoned to death for refusing to enter a plea. Dozens of others were accused, interrogated, and imprisoned. The hunt only ceased when Governor William Phips granted a request from then-president of Harvard University, who denounced the use of speculative evidence, testimonies about dreams and visions. "It is better that 10 suspected witches escape than 1 innocent person be convicted," he wrote. Under pressure because of this, and the fact that his own wife was being charged with witchcraft, he decreed an end to the trial on October 29th. Subsequently, several of those involved admitted their wrongdoing and publicly admitted their guilt. In 1702, the trials were ruled illegal. and 9 years later, the colony ordered that the names of those convicted be cleared along with a financial reward for the heirs. In 1957, the state of Massachusetts officially apologized for what happened. But how did the awkward behavior of a few girls escalate into a community-wide panic that led to the killing of 25 people? Several factors are being unveiled by experts, and these are helping to understand what triggered this bout of paranoia that had deadly consequences. From social tensions and religious zeal to a chaotic justice system, these factors may help us understand why these inexplicable events occurred. Perhaps a good place to start when searching for reasons to explain how and why the Salem witch trials happened is the settlement of Salem itself. This was a precarious society that felt under siege. On the one hand, it was constantly under threat from wolves, Native Americans, or the menace of starvation. On the other hand, the century's end was extremely cold. The witch trials took place at the end of a little ice age period, one characterized by frigid winters and cold, wet summers that led to poor harvests. Some historians connected the hardships this caused to the outbreak of witch trials in Europe. The exposed colonial landscapes only exacerbated the threats posed by bad weather, and the colonists were certainly aware that other settlements were suffering from food and resource shortages. These may have rendered the community more susceptible to an upsurge in paranoia when the first accusation surfaced. Secondly, Salem was a settlement founded upon strong Puritan ideals. The Puritans' origin story was one of persecution. In the 1960s, they still felt threatened, as French Catholics moved closer and closer to Puritan settlements. The religious zeal of the early settlers had been watered down by generational change. It was part of a good Puritan's duty to seek out and remove threats to the community's spiritual purity, whether external or internal. Every church member was expected to follow a stern lifestyle based on moral stringency, thereby breeding an atmosphere of elevated moral conscience in which the need to monitor and police the behavior of one's neighbors increased. And this was a community founded on conformity, so it seems that several of the accused were known to the community as people who did not live in Puritan terms. Third, the community lived in a state of war, with several individuals having personal conflicts and feuds over land or other things. When the trial began, it provided the perfect occasion to accuse a foe and take over a piece of land or some property. The fourth factor surrounds gender. From the 19 people hanged for witchcraft in Salem, 14 were women. The witch hunts, as such, were sometimes reframed as a way for the community to eradicate troublesome women. Some of the accused could fit this template, such as the homeless Sarah Good, who allegedly cursed those who did not help her when she begged, and Sarah Osborne, who famously made enemies through legal disputes. Bridget Bishop, on top of the robbery and witchcraft charges, was also suspected of murdering her first husband. Women in Puritan society were disempowered in all sorts of ways. Whenever they were denied power by the usual means, people assumed that they would seek it in other ways, such as magic. Furthermore, women in Puritan mentality were considered more likely to be seduced by the devil. And, as the very last factor, there is the fear of the supernatural. Environmental stresses, social tensions, and legal shortcomings explain how and why a surge of anxiety burst and increased, but not in the way it took shape. Why did Salem's fears clamp down on finding witches in their own community? It may seem preposterous and far-fetched to us, and yet to the Salemites, in 1692, witchcraft was real. It was a fact of life. The accusations, trials, and killings at Salem took place at the end of an era of growing witchcraft persecutions in Europe and North America, ultimately leaving villagers with a simmering hodgepodge of sinister ideas and images to draw inspiration from. When you look at the intellectual, social, and cultural world of the 17th century, witchcraft made perfect sense. Even though the events in Salem are often depicted as hysteria, this was neither madness nor insanity. The biggest thinkers of the time believed in witchcraft and tried to understand how it happened. Witchcraft belief offered the people of Salem an outlet for all kinds of anxieties. It was an immediate fix for a wide range of problems, from annoying neighbors to the threats of confronting the religious order. And if there is one thing that speaks to the power of such supernatural beliefs in Salem, they could survive their own trials. Everyone was willing to accept that they may have convicted innocent people, but no one was ready to completely forsake the idea of witchcraft for quite some time. The trials could be over, but the underlying beliefs in witches endured.